What's the most disturbing thing you've heard someone say when they thought no one was listening? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1. Well, my mom said it to me, but no one else was listening. My first cousin died in a car accident, and my aunt was driving the car. Everyone was very concerned about my aunt. Her husband and my dad were brothers. My mother said wistfully, "I wish I were your Aunt Dee." I was confused because my aunt had just lost her eldest son. I asked my mom, "You wish my brother had died?" My mother laughed at me like it was the silliest thing she ever heard. "Oh, I don't want anyone to die. I just want the attention he. Don't be so melodramatic." I was shocked that my aunt had gone through the most traumatic event in her life, and my mother was jealous of the attention she got. Creepy AF. Story 2. It's just because they want me to conform. An alcoholic mom to her 5-year-old daughter over the phone. This was in response to the situation she was in. Her daughter had been removed from their home. She was due in court and had to start going to treatment for her alcoholism. She definitely did not know I was in the same room supervising the phone call. Like, yes, we all want you to conform to not drunkenly driving around with your kid in the car, you brave little idiot. Story 3. Just put her in the closet until later. I was in the upstairs bathroom at a party when I overheard 2 guys in the adjacent bedroom talking about a passed out 18-year-old girl. They were laughing, joking about playing rock, paper, scissors to decide who get first. We were on the second floor far from the crowd, and they'd clearly been drinking. I was scared to confront them directly, but once they left the room, I went in, and sure enough, they had actually stuffed her in a closet. I ran downstairs and got my brothers and some of their friends, and we got her out of the house safely. Answer. This reminds me of my prom after party. I had already graduated 6 months before, so it was my first time seeing everyone again, and I was feeling a bit too old and out of place for the underclassmen crowd that ended up showing up. Because of that, I didn't drink much and did a ton of staying to myself, people watching. I was walking by and saw this almost blackout tipsy 16-year-old girl I'd never seen before stumbling by. At the exact same time, a group of guys came up. One put his arm around her, and they started walking away with her into the house. They looked straight up sleazy the way they were acting towards her. I walked up and said, "Do you know them?" to her, and she just slurred something incoherent. The guys all started a little chorus of "she's our friend, well, take care of her," etc. So I asked her again, "Do you know them?" To me, she wasn't acting like they were friends she knew, but she was so tipsy it was hard to tell. At that point, the guys started getting irate with me. I ended up saying, "Okay, what's her name?" as a genuine question because she was going with me, whether they knew her or not. The guys got even more pissed, and one called me a meanie, which I didn't even consider that the question may have been antagonizing their ulterior motives. I just wanted to know her name. So I just said, "Yeah, no, nice try," and hooked my arm around her and held on for dear life BC. She was trying to run around and talk to everyone. I went to the host, who was a friend, and asked him if there was somewhere I could lay her down in a room alone. Privately B, she was going to pass out. And I was worried. He took me to a theater room, and I put her in there and stood outside as guard, just kind of waiting for the night to finish since I wasn't so into it anyway. The guys ended up coming back at some point and trying to go into the room, and I didn't let them. Bless her heart, she also was so hard to contain and tried to leave that room about 50x. But I didn't let her or leave her until most of the guests cleared and the guys were gone. Every time she had to pee, I even made her take me in the bathroom with her. She had me so worried every time I think about it. I'm just so glad I crossed paths with her at that exact time. Story 4. I had lent my car to a coworker, and on the day I was to get my car and keys back, she had me meet her at a pub. She was already tipsy when I arrived and didn't realize it was me she was talking to and said I can give her car back. I need it because the judge won't let me have my car without a breathalyzer machine installed. Turns out she had amassed enough DUIs to have her driving privileges revoked, and she was borrowing any car she could for as long as she could to keep driving home tipsy from the pub every night. She also offered to buy my car and asked if the registration could be left in my name for a while. No. Story 5. When I worked as a nurse in the locked inpatient psych unit, we had a guy come in who had been banned from other hospitals for being violent. Because it was night shift, I handled most of his intake alone. I knew his history, but he was polite and helpful. He didn't complain about having his things searched or being in the locked hall. I had him sit to answer questions and take his vitals. The portable blood pressure machine was acting up, and as I was kneeling next to it, I heard him whisper, "No, it's fine. We don't need to hurt her. She's nice and just doing her job." He wasn't talking to me, and I pretended not to hear. I finished up and got out of there. I'll never forget what he said or the way he was smiling. Edited, Commas are a good thing edited again for poor grammar. Answer: ooh, I had a situation like this too. But I was working at McDonald's at the time. A guy came in and he looked exhausted. It was barely noon, and in between ordering things, he would be telling off some voice that he doesn't want to hurt anyone. It seemed like he had been arguing all day with that voice based on how tired he was. I just patiently stood there and asked clarifying questions about his order with cheese. Any fries? It kind of sounds ridiculous that it asked those questions in hindsight, LOL. But I appreciated that the guy was doing his best to keep it together. He didn't cause any issues left without any incidents. Story 6. Need a minor who's under 17 still? My friend's older sister, thinking out loud when she didn't realize I was in the hallway. She needed to find a minor to steal some stuff so she and her BF could sell it for substances money. My friend had just entered the 6-month window to her 18th birthday, so it wasn't a guarantee of lenient sentencing. She settled on her youngest sister, who was 13 at the time. My friend later confessed that her sister had been forcing her to steal things several times, beginning at the age of 14. She started refusing when she got really high test scores and a scholarship. Answer: my cousin's alcoholic pa's dad did this to her for years. Once she turned 18, he also had her take the stuff to pawn shops herself, but she got busted pawning a bunch of expensive stolen jewelry and the whole story finally came out. For years, he'd been having her befriend other kids and then steal from their parents, mostly the mother's jewelry boxes. Stuff that wouldn't be missed right away. She didn't do any jail time for the jewelry, but while they were investigating, the cops realized her dad was an unregistered intimacy offender. He was never supposed to have had custody of her in the first place, so he did end up going to jail for a while and died a few years later. Story 7. Just what I need is deaf grandchild, said by my mother to my next-door neighbor as I was getting out of the car. I had just given birth to my second child and he failed the newborn hearing screening test. He is deaf. Story 8. I worked as a clerk at front desk emergency room, so I would take your basic details after you had seen the triage nurse. Guy sees the triage nurse, comes to me, then sits in the waiting room chair directly opposite me and begins to talk to himself about how he's going to follow me to my car after my shift, hit me over the head, stuff me in his car, drive me out into the desert. And then he sat there very vividly describing how he was going to violation and take down me. I finished my shift later, looked up, and this massive security guard, Al, was standing by my desk. He walked me to my car for about 2 months. Answer: we used to have a regular homeless person who would come into our Subway and order a ham sandwich a couple times a week. I would always let him just sit in the restaurant for most of my closing shift because he was polite and quiet. But one day, he comes in, orders his sub, and goes to sit down. I'm standing at the till filling out some forms when I hear him muttering to himself in vivid detail about how he is going to take down me. Just muttering very clearly this incredibly violent imagery. When I demanded he leave, he builds a small fort in the corner with chairs and refuses to go until the police come and get him. I don't know if he ever intended to do anything, and maybe he was just harmlessly externalizing intrusive thoughts. But either way, I am not going to take my chances, and neither should anyone else. Story 9. This was about 30 years ago. I was a temp at a health insurance company. I processed claims. I had a lengthy commute, so I arranged to come in an hour later and stay an hour later to avoid rush hour. Anyway, in my cubicle working. The office is practically empty. There was this awful man, Wendell, who was horrible. He had no work ethic and no idea of what appropriate behavior was. I had witnessed and overheard Wendell intimacy harass my coworker Bobby on multiple occasions. Well, Wendell was a couple of cubicle rows away, and I overheard him on a company phone talking to someone who apparently owed him money. He made several graphic, physical threats to this person's safety. I don't know if it was about substances, gambling, loan sharking, or what. Wendell had no idea I was there. The first thing the next morning, I went to my boss and told him everything. I also mentioned that I'd heard and witnessed him intimacy harass Bobby, but she was rejecting his advances. I told my boss I was afraid for Bobby's safety because Wendell clearly had no problem using violence to get what he wanted. My boss was horrified, and Wendell was gone ASAP. Story 10. Right before my dad moved out of town for work, him and mom got into a big fight about money one night, and I don't remember exact words, but he said something like, "This is why I told you that having a second kid was a mistake." The second kid. Answer: I am so sorry you heard that. And I would also say that, while he should never have said that, it does not mean he doesn't love you, and it doesn't mean he regrets your existence. It means he is stressed about money and doesn't know how to communicate his emotions very well. Once I found out that I was an accident, which explains why my brothers are so much older. When I got sad about it, My mom immediately explained that just because things weren't planned this week doesn't mean they love me any less or that I wasn't wanted. Deep down, your dad probably feels the same way. Story 11. Our waitress just the other night muttered, "I'm gonna shoot myself," after talking to the table next to us. We left her a large tip because she really was great, and the table next to us seemed like real assholes. Story 12. I'm a social worker, formerly in family law, and I almost always advocated for the return to parent goal, as the foster care system can be brutal. However, I heard a parent yelling to their child's guardian during a Zoom visit about her no-good child molester boyfriend, not because of what he did, but because he cheated on her while she was in treatment. A lot more explicit language was used, and this was with the child present. She acted very calm and positive when I re-entered the room. Answer: just some input from a foster kid. My first 5 years of life were with a foster family, as my mom had almost eliminated my sister and I from neglect, and we were being molested by her friend or sitter. Our foster family was incredible to us and showed us what a stable, healthy, and loving family should be. We were unfortunately adopted by my mother's family, so the abuse and neglect cycle continued for us until they kicked us out at 18. I know some foster families do not have good intentions, and the system is quite broke and overloaded, but I would think twice about immediately pushing for kids to be put back with family. I know many other foster kids from this experience that have been in the system, and the ones that went back to their families end up getting thrown right back into the same abuse and unhealthy and stable environment, even if the parent wants to do or be better. Looking at options outside of their blood may give them an actual fighting chance to succeed in adulthood. Story 13. Overhearing my mother say I wouldn't go anywhere in life, so it's fine if they continue taking advantage of me financially. Haven't spoken in many years since. While overhearing, that was very painful to learn. My biggest op was my mom, who I thought always had my back. It showed me how toxic my environment was and how much I was actually coping to get by. And by removing myself from that, it has opened many more doors for me. Turns out, when you are not giving every piece of yourself to others who give nothing back, you have the energy to go places in life. Story 14. While waiting on my daughter to be done with guard practice years ago, the couple in the car next to me started fighting. I heard the wife said, "That's why everyone thinks you're a jerk, Brad," which I thought was funny because actually everyone thought Brad was a nice guy who happens to be married to a huge meanie. Answer: my parents have a neighbor who is a massive jerk and is pretty unstable. Takes literally everything as a challenge or a personal insult, abuses his kids on the regular. Apparently, my dad once asked him not to harm his plants on my parents' property, and the guy started on about how my parents' house was known in the neighborhood as the weird house with strange people living in it, and that all the neighbors didn't like them. In reality, all the neighbors had given this guy the nickname Nick the Male Body Part, and were discussing amongst themselves about how shoot of a human he is. Story 15. A piece of otherwise blank printer paper with the shaky words, "I don't have a job. I don't have, nothing," is written after this. The paper was left on the dining room table, face up, and forgotten. My dad had already moved on to other things. His early onset dementia made this one of the few things I ever saw him write before his ability to write disappeared completely. Out of dark fascination, I kept the paper. That was about 2 years ago. He's still alive and living with us under our full-time care. I dare say he's been happier the less he remembers. Nowadays, he's a curious guy who smiles when he notices us. Even though he has long forgotten our names, he still looks for us. Story 16. Last time I visited my mother, I kept overhearing my brother, who temporarily lives with her. One day he was complaining about his son, who said, "But you promised not to spend that money on adult beverage." Another day he hissed at mom's bedroom, "Fudge die." He also bragged about never cheating on his wife. He tried, but it never worked out. It's hard to find the strength to go there again. Story 17. I was standing in line at an ice cream stand with my then boyfriend and his dad. There was a woman in front of us who had buds in and wasn't paying attention. My ex-boyfriend's dad, being the absolute lady charmer he is, looked at me, scoffed, and said, "How funny would it be if I just beat the shoot out of her and violation her?" whilst gesturing to the lady in front of us, the one with the earbuds in. The lady running the booth heard and I heard. Nobody else. She looked fudge terrified, and for good reason. I was trying not to freak out. I knew he was a bad person, but I didn't know the extent of it until that moment. Fudge that guy. Story 18. I was an RN in a nursing home. There was a communal pet cat who lived there. I overheard a lady talking to herself about how she was going to catch it and break its leg. I reported to administration immediately, and she was moved to the memory care unit. The cat was incredibly sweet and would sit on laps and gave a lot of comfort to residents. Disturbing all around. Answer: dang, I have to ask, what state was this in if you're in the U.S.? When I was in high school, I used to house sit for my elderly neighbor when he would go out of town, which was pretty often, and I would take care of his cat. Eventually, he got too old and had to be moved to a nursing home. He wanted me to take the cat, but I couldn't as I lived with my parents, and my dad was allergic, and we had 3 dogs already. I tried so hard to find it a good home, and he had no family left willing to help either. It started out with the nursing home, letting the cat be with him temporarily until we found her a new home, but we never could, and they just let her live there. All the nurses helped take care of her, and she would visit all the patients. After he passed away, she continued to live there too. I didn't have a lot of experience with cats, but she was really the sweetest thing. When I would come over, she would run to the door and flop on her back for me to rub her belly like a dog almost. And when I would water the plant shed, let me carry her around like a baby in my arms. I would stay in his house for hours just playing with her and brushing her. Anyways, I'm sure it's not the same place, but it made me think of Chuck and Monica. Weird name for a cat. Story 19. Wife and I were standing behind a little kid at the aquarium, looking into a tank. All of a sudden he goes, "Ooh, a seahorse. I want to eat one." For 15 years now, every time we see a seahorse, one of us says it. Story 20. My mother telling me I eliminate my brother and my husband. My brother was serving overseas when he passed, and my husband died in his sleep next to me. I don't think anyone in my life would believe me if I told them. I think I'm the only one she's ever shown her ugly side to. Story 21. When I was a server, I waited on this family and heard, "This is why our children dislike spending time with you." Alyssa from the dad, and "I wouldn't die for friends because my life matters more than theirs." Maybe for family from one of the kids. Story 22. My abusive ex-husband. He was dying of self-inflicted and unself-regulated liver failure. He was a mean and angry and bitter dying tipsy. One night, when he thought I was asleep, he leaned in really close to my ear and whispered, "This should be you." After years of trying to help and mitigate and take care of his issues. This was how I know the feeling of blood running cold. He had already tried to eliminate me twice by that point. What we say about strangulation, it's very true. He meant it. Story 23. You can take care of yourself. You always could. I have to choose your brother. He needs me. Said to a little girl whose mother gave her over to foster services, but kept the older, substances-addicted brother who had molested her. It may have been better and a way of protecting her, but it didn't help that little girl when she was later molested by her new foster brother. Story 24. My dad said he was going to eliminate himself on my son's 4th birthday, so every year on his birthday it would also be his passing anniversary, that it would be my fault and my mom's fault directly. That this was a malicious attempt to still emotionally abuse us even after he's gone. Don't worry, he's in a facility safe. I've gotten him help. Story 25. She is no longer useful to me, said my dad while he was on the phone with my sister. This was after I filed for FMLA for my company and spent 12 weeks without pay, living with my parents who are in another state to help them navigate the healthcare system, make decisions about his surgery and treatment, and research and schedule and drive to and attend appointments with oncologists and surgeons following my father's melanoma stage 3C diagnosis. Yes, I understand that you are dealing with a life-threatening diagnosis and a concerning future prognosis, but I gave up 3 months of my life with my husband and daughter and took 3 months out of my career to help you. And now that my time has run out, I am now no longer useful to you? Answer, I'm trying to be with my partner and our kid. Unfortunately, we live 4 hours apart and with our parents because through different circumstances and also the economy, we have both struggled to become independent. The amount of guilt tripping from my mom and brother because I'm not around to help with my dad is unreal. I snapped back at my brother the last time, I'll stay here, but for as long as I stay here, you can't see your girlfriend. Does that sound fair? And clearly not understanding at all, he just replied, well, it's different because she lives nearby, and I just left. Holy fudge, I simply have a kid who has a whole life ahead of them that is far more important than the walking corpse that is my dad, who, by the way, told me to my face at 15 that he'd given up on me. So anyways, my mom refused to let my partner and kid move in, which would allow me to be here all the time like she fudge wants, but is paying for one of my older brothers who hasn't lived with us for 10 years to move out on his own. Story 26. Not something said but witnessed and maybe tame compared to others. We have a few outside cats that were ferals we took in. They get fed in a shed in the evening. A friend that stayed with us went to feed the cats one dark evening. One of them was not wanting to go into the shed, and friend became frustrated and spit on my cat. Friend didn't know my partner was outside and had just walked up on this happening. My partner was so angry, she didn't really address in the moment. That completely altered the way we view this person. Story 27. Co-worker was at my place for dinner. He had his shoes off, and my puppy chewed on them. Co-worker hit the puppy with the shoe and called him a piece of shoot, and puppy yelped. I wasn't supposed to hear any of it. He was asked to leave immediately. Story 28. My son and I go to a particular island in the Philippines every year, sitting at one of our favorite restaurants. Overheard an older white guy talking about how you can FK whoever you want in Philippines, underage girls, etc. My son was 10. We moved seats. I know the Brit owner. He came over to ask what was up. He threw the guy out. Owner had a Filipino wife and had adopted her 2 kids, including a teenage girl. Story 29. My old boss, we only hired him as a favor, in regards to me as a newer hire. I was right behind him and said, "Let me return the favor and quit." I took off my work shirt, threw it at him, and left. I was 19 at the time and a bit of a hothead. I did not handle that as well as I should have. Story 30. Not me, but my first responder instructor in college told the class when she worked at a tragic end prevention call center, she overheard a coworker tell a caller, paraphrasing as this was over 10 years ago, "Sir, taking that many ibuprofen doesn't constitute a tragic end attempt. Call back when you take that many aspirin." My instructor made it her mission to get that operator fired and blacklisted from working any hospital in the area. Rightfully so. Story 31. I was cornered by an outwardly charming man in the basement of a warehouse at 3:00 a.m. We were completely alone in that section, a huge rambling old place. No one used the basement. He said while positioned in front of me the exit, "Check your phone." "No signal, right?" I checked my phone. To my dismay, increasing panic, there was no signal. He was smirking now. "Now try your radio." "Nothing, huh?" Dead nothing. I pushed past him, hauling jerk for the door. He grabbed my wrist, real tight. I yanked away from him, crashed up the waterlogged, sagging steps, gasping something about needing to get back to work because a truck was coming. Nobody in real life knows about this, but at least it seems people know exactly what he is. Story 32. It was something I said. I was living with a roommate, and he was waiting to take me to the airport as I am in hectic last minute of packing to leave. I was really stressed out, and at the time I had this kind of mantra, I would say, it would help me calm down a bit. So I'm dashing around the apartment, grabbing last-minute things and making sure things are set up for him to take care of my cats while I'm gone, and I'm repeating over and over, I'm not going to eliminate anyone. I'm not going to eliminate anyone. Well, I thought he was waiting in his room, but I suddenly see that he's sitting on the floor by the wall petting my cat. We had no furniture in our living room. I had no idea he was there and could hear me, and I felt really awkward and embarrassed. I continued going, and he didn't indicate he'd heard anything, but I'm sure he did and is just thinking, WCAF. Story 33. How dare you hit me in front of the kid, especially when you just used all our money to get your male body part wet at Chick-fil-A. From my old apartment complex, I called the cops on him because there was indeed a toddler and the woman was hitting the guy. But I still can't help but laugh about the CFA comment to this day. Story 34. Worked at a parts store for a couple years. The worst thing I've ever heard from a customer was when I was checking to see if their battery was dead or being overcharged. It was a husband and wife, and the husband was standing at the driver's door where his wife was seated. She had the window down, and they were talking. I was under the hood checking the battery, and I heard the husband say, "It should blow any minute. Hopefully it'll do it while he's near it." I pretended I didn't hear it and told them I had to run back in to grab a wrench to tighten their battery cable in. Not even 5 minutes of me going inside, the battery blew up. Sounded like a fudge cannon, and battery acid went everywhere. On the bright side and karma coming to them, the acid got all over the husband, and he had to be taken to the hospital for burns. Story 35. My wife, Quebecoise, and I were working in a hospitality town and met another couple from Quebec working there, and eventually became friends with them. They were fairly normal, and the four of us got on well enough that we became friends and started hanging outside of work. As I didn't speak much French at the time, we mostly spoke English together. One night we went out to dinner with them and got into the wine. At one point, the boyfriend, who was definitely tipsy, forgot that my wife was also a native French speaker, leaned over to his girlfriend and loudly whispered in French in her ear that he wanted to fudge her in the jerk and have my wife clean him off afterwards. His girlfriend immediately was aware that my wife was a French speaker, and we got to watch the horror slowly spread over her face as she died inside. Both she and my wife left pissed while I had to make small talk with the guy until the bill arrived, as I was at this point still unaware of what had been said. The next day, they quit their job and I heard they moved back home. Story 36. My mom said I don't want to be called grandma, and her actions were even more scorching. She handed back a photo of my children when they were young that I had framed for her. I was a picture of my children under the tree with our dog and cats. You would have had to pry that out of my hands if I were a grandma. She did this by my sister and aunt, and I was shocked. She wasn't angry at me as far as I know. She's just cold. When I was about 6 years old, I heard my grandmother speaking to one of her friends on the phone. She was crying. She said, "I feel so bad for her." Me. Her mother hasn't called to talk to her or even ask how she's doing. I could go on and on. Story 37. A very intelligent, very easygoing work colleague who casually described in horrible detail how he liked to catch and drown squirrels on his property. He dislikes squirrels and thinks it's perfectly acceptable to catch them and put them in a container filled with water, then press another container slowly on top, pushing the squirrel under the water until it's dead. I've literally never been more horrified. He was so nonchalant about it too, which just made it worse. Story 38. Years ago, my ex-boss ranted on the phone about a visit to her granddaughter. I was sitting next door. She affoshed about how the girl had dared to sit on her uncle's lap, flirt, and how she would probably wrap all the men in her life around her finger in the future. What a slut. Mind you, her granddaughter was 3 years old at the time. I felt sick for days afterwards. Story 39. Not quite no one listening, but they clearly didn't think I was listening. I, 27M, had only kind of recently realized I was bisexual and had never done anything about it besides have a crush on a coworker. I still mostly have never done anything about it. I've only dated women. I'm also a violation survivor. I was violationed by a girl when I was 18, and it took years to grapple with the fact that's actually what it was. I have panic attacks sometimes when sexy times are happening. Both of these facts are relevant to the story, I promise. I was at a Halloween party a friend threw with a bunch of college folks. I knew about 6 people total, and there was over 25 in attendance. I got really hammered, really fast. I had like 1.5 drinks of punch, but felt like I drank a half bottle of vodka. Because of how quickly I got tipsy and what happened later, I'm fairly sure I was drugged in some way. I ended up downstairs, away from anyone else except this one guy who was a lot less tipsy than me. I started making out with this guy. He was a Marine and dressed in a silly chicken costume, like a full-on mascot costume. First boy I ever kissed, he got handsy and started to undo my pants, and I backed out. It was too much for me so fast. He tried to talk me into going out to his car. He said he would suck my male body part. I was starting to get super uncomfortable. A panic attack was beginning, and to top it off, I was barely able to stand, so I went upstairs and laid down on a couch. He hung on me the whole way, trying to convince me to let him fudge me. Anyways, eventually he stopped hanging on me, and I told my friend, the host of the party, that he was being a bit much, but I needed to crash. I drifted into and out of sleep, the kind of partial sleep that only comes when I'm super fudge up and consciousness is clinging to the edge of the cliff for dear life. As I'm mostly unconscious, I hear the man and my friend arguing, like raised voices. I open my eyes a little to see them standing next to me, basically standing over me as the man is trying to lift my dead weight up to walk me out of the house. He's saying I agreed to a ride, that he was my ride home and he was just taking care of me. He said we go way back and that she could trust him to make sure I got home safe. She knew that was bullshit and was yelling at him to get the fudge out of her house. I don't recall how that argument ended, but I remember a bit later I was sitting next to her and she was crying and apologizing to me. So yeah, I narrowly avoided being violationed by a stranger at a party because I was too tipsy to defend myself, and I overheard the rapist's plan. Story 40. Not said, but I happened to glance down at my mom's phone, and her and my sister were talking shoot about me. I was 15. I'd explain what they said, but there's a lot of context. Just ultimately, I saw what they really thought about me. Story 41. Back in my hometown on leave, friend went to the local college, invites us to a frat party, went to the bathroom to piss. In one of the stalls, someone puking while 3 guys were arguing about getting her pants down while hearing a struggle. I kicked the one closest to me, who slammed into the stalls. The other 2 scrambled to their feet but were so tipsy was having trouble. They kept begging me not to tell anyone they were just teasing her. I picked her up and took her to my parents because she couldn't tell me where she lived. Next morning, she woke up in my childhood bedroom alone and confused. She remembered bits and pieces, but not going to my house. Story 42. If my girlfriend ever got an abortion, I'd tell her to, overheard from a frat guy pissing off of the side of the porch as I was tagging along with my ex and his roommates who were desperately trying to get into the frat party. I didn't want to be there to begin with, and they obviously didn't want us there. Story 43. My former neighbor, who was an old witch, had a Staffordshire Terrier. It was vicious and aggressive. One day, I was resting at home in my bedroom with the windows open, and I heard her open her sliding glass door and let her dog out. I heard her say to him, "Go get her, go on, go get her." I wondered what was going on, so I looked out the window. She had set her dog off after a cat that had gone into her back garden. Told you she was a witch. Story 44. Two crackheads in a McDonald's talking to each other about how they're going to follow me and hit me on the head with something and steal my backpack. Luckily, my bus stop was literally right outside, so I sat on the McDonald's steps waiting for the bus, and sure enough, they followed me out a few seconds after, but then just meandered off when they realized I was waiting for the bus in plain view. Story 45. I was the first person, I'm just a civilian, checking up on a young woman trapped in her car after a huge car crash. All kinds of fluid leaking from the car. She whispered, "Please, don't leave me. I can't get out, and I can smell the gas." I couldn't really reach her. She was trapped under the barrier on her side of the road and couldn't free her leg. I told her to try and relax so that she would do no further damage to her leg. She asked me to promise her that I would do everything to pull her out, no matter what, if the car would catch fire. I did promise her that. Luckily, help got there quickly and nothing further happened. 38 years later, I still wonder if I would have had the courage to dive headfirst into a burning car to pull her out. Story 46. A friend of a friend at a party. A really pleasant, quiet guy who didn't drink. He got absolutely shoot-faced tipsy and confessed he eliminate his childhood intimacy abuser. He hid the body, and whilst he hasn't been back, he thinks it not found nor ever will be. The morning after, he was terrified. We all reassured him no one heard what he told us. We weren't listening. Story 47. I wish I could remember exactly what was said. On an empty day at Dolores Park, maybe 2014, I overheard a kid ask her, very wealthy looking, "Mom, when do we go back to the moon?" And the mom saying, "We don't talk about that," freaked me the hell out. Story 48. Years ago, grandmother and brother were talking and didn't know I could hear, discussing how my high-functioning, just blunt as hell, autistic sister should be sterilized because they felt she shouldn't be able to have kids considering her condition. Only my wife knows. My sister has a college degree and is smart as fudge, just extremely blunt at times is how I describe it. Answer. RFK Jr.'s Aunt Rosemary Kennedy was very much like this. Dad Joe had her forcibly lobotomized with his wife Rose's knowledge. It made her unable to feed herself, use the bathroom, reverted her to a young child physically and mentally. They secretly institutionalized her for decades until her passing. This is why RFK Jr. has such a hard-on about curing autism. He stole private health data to cull a list of all autistics in the country and wants to send them to camps. RFK Jr.'s wording describing autistics is very troubling. They'll never have a job, never get married, never write a poem. Like we're all severely mentally and physically disabled BC, that's what they made dear old Aunt Rosemary into. Story 49. On a gross but lighter note, well, your career as a hand model is over-muttered by the nice doctor who was stitching me up after an accident in which my hand got caught between my bike and a gravel road. I had been instructed to lie down and face the other way because it was not pretty. My girlfriend was on that side trying to keep me distracted, and we were in a busy-ish ER, so I don't think he thought it'd hear. I burst out cry laughing, which I'm sure made him feel great. My career as a hand model ended before it started, but my hand is fully functional and pretty normal looking, all things considered. Thanks to him, I also learned that you can just Frankenstein sew fingernails back on to protect the nail bed, and that hand and finger injuries can be extra hilarious because sometimes you get so much gauze wrapped like a big novelty baseball mitt and have to keep it elevated above your heart for the first few days so everyone can see. Story 50. Some guy was in the cafe area of the grocery store I worked at, talking on the phone about how he was going to go beat the shoot out of someone. I don't care if I eliminate him. Cops are after me for shoot anyways. He definitely wasn't being sarcastic. Story 51. Yeah, that's her with the gold. I better use some Tic Tacs just in case I start kissing her. You know I'm automatically attracted to beautiful. I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. Just kiss. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything, grab them by the private area. You can do anything. Story 52. 20 years ago, I was a lifeguard and overheard two boys mercilessly ripping on a third, calling him gay boy, F, etc. When I got on break, I found them by the snack bar and told them they were disgusting. They couldn't have been much more than 14. Story 53. One of my bosses closed his office door last week and ranted about the plight of white men and how terrible women are, and threw in an insult about Black Lives Matter as well. He always closes his door when he doesn't want me to hear him swearing, freaking out, but I can still hear everything. Story 54. When I was working as a TA teaching computers to teens, I overheard one of the special needs teachers saying to another that they should be allowed to beat some of these little shoot because that's the only thing they'll manage to understand. This isn't the only fudge-up thing I've heard in the same context and setting, but it really stuck with me with how casually she said it. Story 55. Overheard two psychology psychiatric, unsure both courses had classes together, students talking about how mentally ill people shouldn't have rights or be treated as people by the state. I was having a hard time asking for help with my mental health at the time, and this made it even worse. Just the idea that if there were students who think this, there are also definitely practicing professionals who agree, gives me chills. Story 56. First time I heard my mom saying, "Oh God, I wish he dies in a road accident." She was talking about my dad. Years later, she started praying this in front of me. Few years later, my dad committed tragic end. Story 57. My older sister's husband was in the U.S. military. I overheard him while he was on the phone telling someone that, if we don't have a war soon, I ain't never going to get the chance to eliminate somebody. Story 58. I was 18 working at CVS, not the pharmacy, as a cashier on an overnight shift. A very attractive young lady, maybe around 25, comes into the store and without even glancing at our direction, continues walking down an aisle as I lose vision of her. I was about to go back on my phone and continue a game I was playing when I hear a guy whisper to himself, "Fudge, I'd loved a violation that meanie." And I immediately glanced up and look at the direction it came from. I see my male coworker standing there, looking in the direction the woman walked past. He then looks to his side and sees me and just walks away. I was fudge stunned, terrified, and I didn't know what the fudge I was supposed to do. Life up until that point had not prepared me for this situation. Story 59. My dad was gnarly, and I'm glad he's dead now. When I was about 15, I was up late reading when I heard him drunkenly stumble down the hallway. I hid the book and pretended to be asleep when he opened my door. I heard him say, "I am not attracted to my teenage daughter," as he watched me sleep. To his credit, that was the only thing of that nature that ever happened, and it was only words. Even so, to this day, it makes my skin crawl. I felt so vulnerable. I never told my family because he did so much other heinous shootout in the open, and nobody helped me. So why would this be different? Story 60. Paramedics should replace their Naxalon with morphine and just finish off substances addicts when they OD. We should taint methadone to eliminate off addicts in rehab. If I ever found out my kids did substances, I'd be having a very, very late-term abortion. My neighbor's delightful son-in-law, who loves to loudly declare his views. Oh, also, if only AIDS worked faster, think of how good the world would be right now. Story 61. I remember one guy was too comfortable around me, so if we stayed alone, he could tell me about his self-harm, ways he would like to torture our classmates, how he would off me at my home. I don't really think he treated me like a human being, more like just a non-judgmental listening ear, because it was a period of my life I couldn't care less about anything and was just in my own little bubble. Story 62. You can find love in a garbage can while shaking his head sadly. I used to work as a job coach for adults with developmental disabilities. This was said by a guy with Prader-Willi syndrome. I'm sure he was probably just repeating something one of his caregivers from his group home said to him, but it still took me by surprise. Story 63. Uluru is a significant cultural site for Indigenous Australians. Literally every tour you go on while you are there, you hear about a once beautiful culture that was destroyed when a small group of young Aboriginal children, they wouldn't have been older than 5, jumped in the pool. A fat, middle-aged white dude asked his friend why they were allowed in there. Story 64. I was waiting a table as a 15-year-old at a breakfast diner. This was over 20 years ago, and I still remember it vividly. A family of 4, the mom and kids all looked scared. They all politely ordered, and then the dad told me to never have kids. It was disgusting. Story 65. Why can't she just allow the substances to take her so she can stop embarrassing us? And she will never be as smart as us, and she is mildly pretty. She has nothing going for her. She should just ingest the whole bottle. Story 66. I was standing in a dark part of a street having a vape waiting for a ride share, and a young lady who looked like she just came out of a Rava nightclub, 1819, walked past me wearing typical club attire, platforms, fur top, and some short shorts. It was about 3 a.m. in the morning, and I didn't give her a second thought. The next moment, these two older gentlemen, who looked roughly 50 or 60 years old dressed in business attire, walked past and say to his buddy in a low predatory tone, "This one's advertising what she has on the menu. Just made my skin crawl." Story 67. I was shopping in a clothing store. I overheard these two old German women talking about Jews. I was mortified. They were just carrying on about how sad it was that the camps are of no use now. They were old enough to be the children of Wehrmacht German soldiers. Story 68. My male co-workers discussing the kind of personality characteristics that make a girl easy to date violation and know that she'll be too ashamed to go to the police. 4 of them, over lunch. It's really hard to live with the idea that you can find 4 guys in one office who think date violation is just hunky-dory. What are the rest of the men like that I'm not overhearing? Story 69. My mom passed away at age 31. Bad heart. My dad was overwhelmed with grief from losing her and the responsibility of now trying to raise 3 kids on his own. I was the oldest at age 10. We spent a night at my grandparents' house a short time after Mom's passing. For some reason, I couldn't sleep well that night and got up out of bed. I got as far as to where I could hear my dad talking to my grandmother without them seeing me, and overheard my dad talking about thinking of giving up custody of us kids to my mom's oldest sister. My aunt practically was the one who raised my mom and thought of her as her baby. Mom was the baby of 5 kids. So as such, she was exceptionally fond of us 3 kids as well. For me, though, hearing Dad say that was crushing. I just lost my mom, and it sounded like I was about to lose my dad as well, and that he didn't even want us. I went back to bed scared and nearly in tears. Luckily, Grandma talked him out of it, and instead had us all move in, including Dad, with her and Grandpa. I never ever mentioned to my dad or grandparents what I overheard that night. Story 70. My ex was a fluent Cantonese speaker, and I'm a white guy. We went to a restaurant, and the staff nonstop talked shoot about us in Cantonese, how ugly our mixed-race babies would be, how disgusting I was, etc. When we were done, my ex asked for the check in Cantonese, and you could see them turn red. Story 71. Overheard a kid swearing at himself. He ended the tirade with something along the lines of wanting to die. The boy was only 8 years old. I'm a teacher, so of course I approached him and tried to talk to him. He matter-of-factly said his life was shoot, he disliked his parents and wants to die. I told his main teacher, but he already is known to child services, so not much more was done. I've made it a point since then to always talk to him when I see him around school, trying to build him up. One of the reasons I'm quitting teaching and getting a degree in psychotherapy. Story 72. I used to babysit my neighbor throughout high school, 4 days a week every week. We got very close. She was like a little sister, and I knew her parents well. One day while we were studying at the desk, the mom and grandma are sitting on the couch behind us talking. Then they started using horrible racial slurs, kids adopted from South America with 110 native genetics. She's essentially black with white parents. She stopped writing mid-sentence then, and I froze. I loved the kid. I was in awe. Whispered to her, "Did you hear that?" And she said, "Yeah." Whispered, "None of what they're saying is true. You know that, right?" She said, "Yeah." When I left, I asked to speak with the mom privately. Chewed her out and said I wouldn't stay and watch her break her daughter's heart, that if I hear that again, I'm gone. I couldn't stop her being that way, but I could stop it for the few hours a day I was there. She apologized and promised to stop. She did at least when I was around. Poor kid. Story 73. Trigger warning for intimacy assault. He said it, and he meant to tell me. A friend I'd known since elementary admitted to having a violation alternative tastes, quote, CNC without the C, and subscribing to Revenge adult content secret recording channels on Telegram. He also told me he developed a method for tipsy driving. When he's seeing double, he can adjust his eyes to see the road clearly. Fudge psycho. Part of his grooming to assault me later that month. Story 74. While in Spain with my mom, we went out for dinner, and we heard this very infamous man from my country literally detail some of the most corrupt shoot he had done to his daughter's boyfriend or husband. He even mentioned trying to get permanently rid of the previous attorney general, as he was the one who brought up the case against him. He was in Spain for the longest time until he was able to get extradited back to my country. Now I believe he is in prison or house arrest, but it was like a whole thing. Story 75. When I was younger, we went to a village in the mountains to hike. My mom's friend knew the area, so we went with him. When we were all sat at dinner, I lip-read my mom's friend, asking her, "Do they know?" And she replied, "No, they can't know." I'm 27 now, and I still don't know what that was about. Story 76. I was once in a library studying late, and two people were whispering behind a bookshelf. One of them said, "Sometimes I wonder how many people I could get away with hurting before anyone noticed." The other just laughed nervously, like it was a joke, but the tone was too calm. I pretended I didn't hear anything, but I thought about it at home and realized I could hurt a lot of people emotionally, but physically, probably like 3. Story 77. "You're making me eliminate you," on a dark street in the middle of the night, said by a guy with a knife to the guy he was about to stab. Domestic violence situation. They didn't realize I was there. Startled them so much when I stepped out of the shadows that I was able to de-escalate the situation without anyone getting physical. Story 78. When I was a student taking the bus to high school every day, a crazy, goofy guy would be there very often and say crazy, but funny, shoot. He seemed very nice and fun, just a bit odd. I was very doubtful about this guy because he was often talking to young girls, 12, 14 years old, while being himself around 30 years old. One day I leaned behind him without him noticing. He was talking loud, funny shoot to a 12 years old girl, and all of a sudden he lowered his voice and said with a smile, "I know you go through that street while going to school in the morning. Tomorrow I'll come and run you over with my car and nobody will stop me. If you say something, I'll eliminate you tonight." The girl turned white, me too to be honest. He said it with a very calm voice and big smile, so everyone around thought he was still saying funny things. I called him out to everyone. The girl did too, and he got kicked out of the bus. Every time we saw him with friends, we would alert anyone in the bus. One time the cops came but dismissed it quickly. He's just a crazy guy, we know him. Story 79. The second time I visited my now wife's family, who lives on the other side of the country, I overheard her father screaming at someone over the phone. I didn't hear the entire conversation, but it was clear he was screaming at a woman who owed money to his brother. I listened to my future father-in-law threaten to come over with his brother and violation her if she didn't pay him back. I told my now wife and we confronted him together. He didn't even deny it. He said his threats were perfectly justified. We don't see him much anymore. We unfortunately can't cut him out completely because he controls access to severely disabled mother-in-law, and my wife isn't willing to sacrifice that relationship. Story 80. My sister is my mother's golden child, and we've been estranged for many years. Several years ago, my sperm donor was complaining to me about her and how she's always threatening to eliminate herself. My sister's bipolar. Then he said, as if he'd forgotten I was even there, "Why doesn't she just do it already?" As much as I don't get along with my sister, that comment stunned me. He's always been a garbage excuse for a human being, and I haven't spoken to him since 2016. Story 81. Someone outside the store I work at, commenting on models in our marketing who were a bit on the bigger side, but not really to me. I overheard her say to her friend, "It's fine that they sell that stuff, but they shouldn't show it." I liked when they had the skinny models because it motivated me not to eat. Internally, I was just like, "Girl, go get some help. Seek a therapist." Story 82. On a different level, worked as an assistant at a salon, mostly a conservative Republican clientele, though the owner was a nice elder lady. I heard a few remarks and comments awful people tend to make when they think no one is listening. It's been a few years now, so I've forgotten most of them. I'd have to think really hard about them. But they're along the lines of what generational wealthy people think of the average person. The one that has stuck with me was one lady's comment about the Kroger she had visited, in regards to the employees having one of those morning meetings. I guess they mentioned vacation time. So this lady says, "I don't think they should even be allowed to take vacation time. Like that's what these people think of us peon working class." This was like 2018 to 2021, but these people have always thought this way. It was just really disheartening. We should all be allowed to make a decent, honest living and a livable wage without just being slaves to the wage. I hear some crazy remarks at my current job as well. Story 83. Need to use the throwaway for this one. Not one person, but 3 COs at jail. I work in a larger city in the U.S. aiding women that are victims of intimacy trafficking. It's a huge problem here. They often get picked up for prostitution. Unfortunately, we don't have many resources, but we do have a lot of people in power that exasperate the issue. Anyways, my clients often spend time in jail. I have special access to them beyond the typical visitation setup. One day, I was waiting in the hall to be escorted to my client when 3 COs were around the corner unaware of my presence. They were laughing, talking about which women they just violation, which ones are the best, how they intimidate by intimacy, assaulting new detainees brought in by LEOs, aiding the LEOs to do the same by showing them the pods with broken cameras, more. I immediately reported it to my supervisor, who escalated it to the jail's higher-ups. The next time I was there, one of the big shots pulled me aside, asked if they really needed to remind me to keep your fudge mouth shut. Things soon got worse. Story 84. Back in high school, I was hiding in the bathroom during a panic attack when I heard two girls walk in. One was sobbing about how she'd pushed her little brother down the stairs and told everyone he fell. Story 85. When I was in high school, I was on a first and last date with a guy from my neighborhood. He was driving me home, and it was getting dark. There was a guy walking down the road in the middle of our lane, and my date commented that he was an idiot for walking in the middle of the road. The guy was black, and we were both white. My date said stupid N-word. Then under his breath, he muttered, he'd make good target practice. I didn't know the guy well and hadn't spent a lot of time with him, but he had always seemed nice, and we played together as kids. I never heard him use that word or say anything so disturbing before. Story 86. When I was at university, we'd been boozing into the small hours. My boyfriend and his friends all thought I was asleep. I heard one of them discuss a gang violation he'd participated in. None of them called him on it. Story 87. God, she's so stupid. My then boyfriend, while in a recording studio in college, he was in the studio recording me singing a track. I was confused about something technical, and he hadn't realized he had left the two-way mic on, so I could hear him talking to someone else in the booth about me. Not really disturbing, but it has stayed with me for so many years. It was a horrible light bulb moment that I really couldn't ever fully trust someone, no matter how much I thought they loved me. It has affected so many of my relationships as an adult. Story 88. My Phil did something like this to a far lesser degree. He wouldn't ice his face or do anything to reduce the swelling after major dental work. When I asked him why, he said, well, how am I going to get sympathy if no one can tell my face is swollen? My gob was thoroughly smacked. WTF is wrong with these people? Story 89. OMG, one of my former friends said something like this to me. Just us in the car, and she literally said she wished she would get into a non-fatal, not serious car accident so she could receive attention sympathy. I told her that was fudge up, and she laughed. Story 90. This reminds me of my prom after party. I had already graduated 6 months before, so it was my first time seeing everyone again, and I was feeling a bit too old and out of place for the underclassmen crowd that ended up showing up. Because of that, I didn't drink much and did a ton of staying to myself. People watching. I was walking by and saw this almost blackout, tipsy 16-year-old girl I'd never seen before stumbling by. At the exact same time, a group of guys came up. One put his arm around her, and they started walking away with her into the house. They looked straight up sleazy the way they were acting towards her. I walked up and said, "Do you know them?" to her, and she just slurred something incoherent. The guys all started a little chorus of she's, our friend well, take care of her, etc. So I asked her again, "Do you know them?" To me, she wasn't acting like they were friends she knew, but she was so tipsy it was hard to tell. At that point, the guys started getting irate with me. I ended up saying, "Okay, what's her name?" as a genuine question because she was going with me whether they knew her or not. The guys got even more pissed, and one called me a meanie, which I didn't even consider that the question may have been antagonizing their ulterior motives. I just wanted to know her name. So I just said, "Yeah, no, nice try," and hooked my arm around her and held on for dear life, BC. She was trying to run around and talk to everyone. I went to the host, who was a friend, and asked him if there was somewhere I could lay her down in a room alone privately. BC, she was going to pass out, and I was worried. He took me to a theater room, and I put her in there and stood outside as guard, just kind of waiting for the night to finish since I wasn't so into it anyway. The guys ended up coming back at some point and trying to go into the room, and I didn't let them. Bless her heart, she also was so hard to contain and tried to leave that room about 50x, but I didn't let her or leave her until most of the guests cleared and the guys were gone. Every time she had to pee, I even made her take me in the bathroom with her. She had me so worried every time I think about it. I'm just so glad I crossed paths with her at that exact time. Story 91. I was at a party at the college I used to go to, at a very good friend's house. I noticed she was not in the living room and went on to the balcony to see if she was there. She was, and had 4 guys around her and being not polite with their hands. I told them to stop. They told me to fudge off, and then the fight started. I got my jerk kicked, but my friend got back inside and away from them. I'd do it again. Story 92. This is a thing? People just let their coworkers just borrow a full-fledged vehicle? What about the insurance and stuff? Are we talking full-sized cars or is this some small community with golf carts? Answer: she and I did both contact our insurance companies to cover her on the vehicle for the agreed-upon time. My insurance allowed me to add another driver, and she paid the fee difference. It all seemed very proper and legal, and I had no idea about her nightly habits of getting tipsy and driving home from the pub until I met with her to retrieve my car. At work, she was reliable and did her job well. I hung out with her a few times outside of work, but I never saw her get tipsy until that evening at the pub. It was a wholly unexpected change of circumstances. The next day at work, she didn't seem to remember meeting me the night before. It was a strange experience, to put it lightly. I quit the job 5 years ago. Story 93. I work in mental health too. I specialize in psychotic disorders, so I have quite a few of the same stories. But luckily, I see my clients on a daily basis. I work in a group home, and we have solid rapport, so it's easy to identify if they're legitimately unstable or if it's their jerk internal stimuli that just won't stop bothering them. But I've definitely gotten my fair share of "I won't do it, I like her" over the years. Answer: my second day in mental health, I was tasked with transporting a schizophrenic client across the state to another IMD. It was the first time I'd met someone with schizophrenia, so I made the mistake of asking questions. He told me he had problems with internal stimuli. He said, "Yeah, they're telling me to hurt you, but I won't because you're nice." I actually said, "That's rough, buddy," and was thankful for the nice sturdy cage separating us. Guy was cool though. When I stopped for gas and let him use the restroom, he tried to buy me an energy drink. Story 94. Ooh, I had a situation like this too, but I was working at McDonald's at the time. A guy came in and he looked exhausted. It was barely noon. And in between ordering things, he would be telling off some voice that he doesn't want to hurt anyone. It seemed like he had been arguing all day with that voice based on how tired he was. I just patiently stood there and asked clarifying questions about his order with cheese. Any fries? It kind of sounds ridiculous that it asked those questions in hindsight, LOL. But I appreciated that the guy was doing his best to keep it together. He didn't cause any issues left without any incidents. Story 95. My mom has a similar story from her time in a psych ward. She was helping a patient, and at some point he said, "Thank you, mother." She thought it was sweet he saw her as a maternal figure. When she got out of the room, her colleague pulled her aside and asked, "Did he just call you mother?" My mom smiled and said yes. Her colleague then informed her that the guy was in there because he had eliminated his mother. Totally freaked my mom out. This was 30-some years ago, before any of her kids was born, and to this day, she will never let us refer to her as mother. When I was younger and got in trouble, she'd call me by my full name, and I'd retort back by calling her mother. She was never amused. Story 96. There's a couple videos I've seen on Insta of people with schizophrenia that have tried to show what audio and visual hallucinations are like that they experience, and it's an eye-opening experience. Feels like such a trauma to endure. Story 97. I was cleaning a park bathroom alone in the early morning when I was 19. When I walked out, I noticed a young man sitting on a bench a couple 100 feet away. He was yelling and said, "I am not going into the bathroom. I'm not doing that. I am not a dog." I was intimacy assaulted a couple years before, so I might have been overly paranoid about what he was referring to, but I couldn't pack up and walk to the van quick enough. Story 98. Something similar happened to me. I take psych meds for depression, and if you don't take them when in jail, they move you to a special unit for medicine refusal. I was locked up with a ton of psychotic people. Most were harmless, but sad to admit, they could be annoying. Any woozy, I was locked up with one dude. He would cover his whole body with his blanket and his face too, all day long, even eat with his food under the covers. But one time, he uncovered and he whispered, "I'm almost ready now. Just gotta wait for lockdown." And he had a super scary look in his eyes. It wasn't rage, more like a proud killer who's lost his marbles years ago.